For the last 15 years, the report in its existence have been covering also individual countries in terms of their economic outlook and social development. Since the last 4 years, we have covered now all 54 countries in Africa. And this is done mainly in collaboration with our country economists in the bank. All of them write the country notes, which eventually will explain to you how it's done. But the report also has gained some global recognition. As you can see, this is a snapshot from the CNN presentation on Fareed Zakaria's GPS in 2013 when he used the report to describe emerging Africa and rising Africa in his GPS presentation. So after this commercial about the African economic outlook, let me go into the content of the report. It has several chapters, the main report, including the macroeconomic outlook, where every year we present the pulse of the African economy. What are the drivers of growth? What are the macroeconomic stability situations, the financial flows, and the risks that the continent faces, region by region, country by country, using several of our internally and externally used models for validation purposes. But also we report trade and finance issues, human development, and then political and economic governance, as well as thematic topics that are selected every year by the President of the African Development Bank. This year is about sustainable cities. My share is to just present in 10 minutes the macroeconomic outlook for Africa. As you know, the African rising narrative is now being a bit questioned by many due to the fall in commodity prices, particularly oil and gas. So this report identifies, of course, the path of economic growth for Africa, still maintaining its resilience, and also our belief that the Africa rising narrative is still a valid one. Growth for different parts of Africa, the outlook and also the performance shows a slight decline in 2016, but then we expect a rebound in 2017 and also this year, 2016. In some countries, the growth rate has been above 7%. Still, about 6 African countries are one of the 10 fastest growing countries in the world, both from Western Africa, including Cote d'Ivoire, in Eastern Africa, including Rwanda, Ethiopia, and many others. Of course, Africa, all of us know, is a 1 billion population, 54 countries, with different sets of economic levels, historical and also cultural diversities. Therefore, in this report, we also reflect those diversities. As you can see, some of the growth pulse that is happening in the continent is driven largely in Eastern Africa, which has shown a strong growth despite being not natural resource endowed, but also Western Africa. Southern Africa region has been slowed down by slow growth in South Africa particularly, and North Africa, the political economic situation also has slowed down the pace of growth. However, on the average, still the prospect for Africa, at least when you consider even by the global standards, the pace of growth in Africa is not really bad, particularly given our also historical dependence on natural resources. The fact that domestic demand seems still to be robust enough to carry per capita GDP higher than zero is something we need to recognize, but also consider the fact that the sustained decline in commodity prices with no appropriate measures of transforming the structure of African economies, sustaining growth might be challenging. So the growth picture almost I painted to you by global standards. Still we are doing fine. But we are not also suggesting that the resilience of African economies is sufficient enough to make significant headways into poverty reduction. Our estimate always has been that Africa really needs a growth rate of 7% and above every year to end extreme poverty from the continent. So this is not doubted. The regional breakdown of economic growth that we have for 2016 shows, as I said, Eastern Africa and Western Africa are pulling the rest of the continent up in terms of the average growth rates. But as we look forward into 17 and beyond, North Africa is also expected to come back and sustain higher growth rates. And hopefully Southern Africa, with the reforms that are happening in the region, the impact will be positive growth. Africa has been attracting FDI quite substantially. As you can see, still, despite all the headwinds, we continue to attract a significant amount of resources. So just to save time for my colleagues, I just need to flip through some of the slides very quickly. The trade, which is supposed to be an engine of growth in Africa, over the years what we have seen is the share of net exports in terms of influencing average economic growth has been moderate, around 20%. But when you look at the absolute numbers, the trade has been significantly rising. Particularly intra-Africa trade has increased now from a low of 5% in the early 20s and the mid-90s to 15% in recent times. And we hope this trend will be sustained in future. Another aspect of African economies is, of course, by historical comparisons, we still maintain a good degree of macroeconomic stability. Inflation has been contained in many countries except few pockets, and generally within the 5% to 7% range in many of the countries. Now the impact of the global oil price, including also metals and others, has been worrying investors, and of course all of us here, and the bank and with its partners, we have tried to look at the impact of this on Africa's prospect. Let me just come back on a slide. Okay, maybe I missed it. Anyway, the effect of the global price decline in commodities is not the primary one. So I don't want to be misquoted. The primary effect is not as significant as it's said in many media outlets. Actually, for a 1% increase in commodity prices, such a decline in commodity prices such as oil, the effect on economic growth is 0.2%, which is much lower and significantly lower. The secondary effects, particularly that works through macroeconomic instability, deficits and in current account and also government budget, could eventually, however, dissipate and precipitate the growth crisis. So those are the issues we need to balance as we look forward to the next 2 years. So with this, I conclude my presentation and thank you for your listening.
And thank you very much for that. And that was, of course, Abebe Shimelis, Acting Director, Development Research at the FDB. Now, I'd like Ayodele Odosula, who is the Chief Economist for the UNDP Africa, to come and make his presentation.
Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, my job is very simple. Mine is just to look at the human development dimension of the 2016 African Economic Outlook Report and to see how we have progressed over time and again, the implications on the theme of the year in terms of sustainable city and structural transformation, which has been one of the major developmental goals of the leaders of the continent. Let me just start by saying the key messages emerging from this year's report as it relates to human development are quite simple but loaded. The first one is that it's clear that Africa is making steady progress in enlarging people's choices with gains in education, health, and living standards. And again, the progress varies by country and by subregions. And on the basis of this, we have been able to really show that there has been appreciable move from where we were in the 90s and now. But the kind of progress we've achieved seems not to be sufficient to really help us to achieve leaving no one behind goal by 2030. And we have been able to identify some key impediments to accelerated progress. And the first is inequality that has reduced the poverty elasticity of growth, meaning inequality has hampered the capacity of the economic growth to really influence rapid reduction in poverty. And for us to really make substantial progress, we need to really dent inequality. And two, weak structural economic transformation that limits the work opportunities for youth and women. And finally, the third impediment relates to limited advances in gender equality, which again hampers skills and entrepreneurial development of women. There are a lot of development actions which have been suggested in terms of lifting the frontier of human development in the continent. Now, the first message. You can see that Africa is one of the fastest growing regions in terms of human advancement. What we've been able to achieve in terms of education, in terms of health, and in terms of living conditions. It shows that since 1990 to date, we've been growing at an average annual rate of about 1.34% relative to South Asia and East Asia and the Pacific that are more or less ahead of us. And if you see the kind of growth over years, again, it shows that it hasn't been the same pattern since 1990 to date. We experienced accelerated growth between 2000 and 2010, and since then, the growth in human development seems to have, slowed down a bit from an average of about 1.5% between 2000 and 2010 to just about 0.7% since 2010 to date. And we all know this. The impact of the global economic crisis seems to be slowing down some of this transformation between growth and human development in the continent. Again, when you compare the growth in human development across the various subregions of the continent, especially in the area of education, health, and living standards, it shows that, North Africa is leading the trajectory of growth, very close to East Asia and the Pacific. Again, followed by Southern Africa, Central Africa, East Africa, and West Africa. What is important to note is that there has been a lot of changes over time, and what we need to really do is how do we really accelerate the pace of growth in human development in the continent? Well, like I said earlier on, the progress varies across countries and subregions. And you can see that only very few countries are considered to be in the group of high human development between, these are countries that were able to have human development index of between 0.8 0.7 and close to 0.8. And we have countries like Seychelles, Algeria, Libya, Tunisia, and Mauritius. And we have, again, about 12 countries that are considered to be the medium human development category. That is, those within 0.55 and 0.699 within of living a human development index. The rest are in the low human development category. But we have to note that some countries have really shown substantial progress. In fact, if you look at those countries that have done quite well between 2000 and 2010, the two leading countries globally, Ethiopia and Rwanda, happen to come from the continent. In terms of those countries that are able to increase human development index by at least 3% annually. And again, if you look at countries that have been able to grow at an annual rate of about 2% since 1990 to date, that's why we have other countries like Mozambique, Mali, and Niger. So the progress across countries really vary, and we're proud to have some countries that are really setting the pace in terms of growth of human development. Overall, loss in human development relating to inequality has been quite high. The impact we've had in terms of accelerated progress in human development seems to have been diminished because of the high level of inequality in the continent. And you can see inequality in Africa reduced the gain in human development by about 33%, meaning about a third of the progress we've achieved in human development seems to have been lost because of high level of inequality. And we need to do something quite substantial to really accelerate this. I mean, the progress on human development to be sure that we do not lose what we are gaining in human advances as a result of inequality. Now, there are a lot of things in terms of social institutions, gender inequalities that are really impeding progress on human development. There are a number of them which we thought there is need for us to look into. And we need to really make sure we all promote with all sense of dedication and commitment advancement in gender equality. And we need to really make sure that we give it serious attention, not only in terms of resource allocation, but in terms of strong political will and commitment to really deliver in terms of using concrete actions to really remove all the bottlenecks and impediments to gender equality in the continent. Well, in terms of linkages, based on the theme of this year's report, Sustainable Cities, Structural Transformation and Human Development, it's clear that we are talking in terms of having some kind of instruments that will definitely guide us in moving in the right direction. And we're happy to say we've done quite well under the MDGs. And again, the kind of goals, targets, and indicators that are put forward on Agenda 2030, that is Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the African Union's Agenda 2063, tends to chart the pathway for us to really move, because all of them talked about the imperative of human development and human advancement. And one thing we know in terms of bringing the linkage quite succinctly is for us to really promote decent work for youth and women in sustainable settlements. Because for us to really use acceleration in urbanization in the continent to really enhance living conditions, we need to pay adequate attention on how it impacts provision of decent work, especially to youth and women. And again, the need for citizens to be engaged for efficient and equitable settlement that promote human development is very important. One thing that really comes out very clearly in this report is that where human rights is quite strong, where citizens' engagement and participation in development process is quite high, then we tend to have strong linkages between sustainable cities and human development. And again, promoting human progress through more sustainable human settlements point to a lot of issues which we thought we need to really mention. Current urbanization pathway reduces the pace of human development. What we know is that urbanization is a double-edged sword in the sense that it promotes human development, but on the other hand, increases inequality and tensions, especially among the slum dwellers. For us to really make sure that it has strong impact positively on human development, we need to address the issue of inequality and tensions being generated as a result of slum in our cities. Effective strategies for overcoming exclusion and inequality is one of the things we need to really focus our attention on to really maximize the benefits associated with sustainable cities in terms of its impact on human development. And few things we have mentioned is, one, access to decent work, coverage and effectiveness of social protection, issues relating to good health and education, and safety and rule of law. We also need to really understand the policy imperatives for human progress for all in sustainable cities. One, we need to invest in youth, develop what we call skills and talent as well as innovations to meet the city's growing demand. The requirement of the cities seem to be changing every time, and we need to understand what are the factors that are really driving this changing in demand and make sure the kind of investment in youth and women is tailored towards filling that particular gap. And again, appropriate skills, education content, and matching. What we realize is that there is a wide variance between the labor market reality and the kind of education that we are really implementing in the continent, and there's need for us to really match labor market reality with the content of our educational system. Again, social protection plays a critical role, and we need to make it more targeted and more effective. Again, like I said, effective participation, enhance accountability, and improve local capacity for service provision, again, are policies that will enhance the linkage between sustainable city and human development. The last part of it relates to building resilience and environmental sustainability through technology and issues relating to disaster risk reduction. We need to really pay substantial attention to this for us to really maximize the benefit of sustainable city for human development. Well, I know that the main challenge we have is that moving from issues of public policies to concrete actions. This is where we need to pay adequate attention on and make sure that our implementation framework becomes quite strengthened for us to really achieve the goal of enhancing human development through our sustainable cities. I'll say thank you for your attention.
Let's give him a round of applause again, ladies and gentlemen. Ayodele Odusula, Chief Economist of UNDP. Now, at this point, I'd like to invite the rest of the panelists up, and just before we have our final presentation, which will be coming in now from Mario Penzini. Our panelists are made up of, let me start with the lady, Aisha Chirabo Chashire, who is the Deputy Executive Director, UN Habitat. Let's give her a round of applause as she comes up. We also have Mamadou Bite, who is Managing Director of the Rockefeller Foundation. And we have Abdoulaye Diane, who is Executive Director of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. Let's give them a round of applause. Coming up to make a presentation at this point, as the panelists settle into their positions, is Mario Pegini, who is the Director of the OECD Development Center. Having the panelists up here just makes it easier for us to begin the discussions as soon as the presentations are done. Our third and final presentation now, Mario Pegini.
Good morning. It is a real pleasure to be here with you today to launch our report. And as you have heard, the special theme this year is sustainable cities. There are many reasons for that, but first of all, it's because we are living exceptional times. The approval of SDGs last year was a major event, but not the only one. The meeting of Addis Ababa, the meeting in Paris for COP21 will be followed by a very important meeting, which is Habitat, and we are all working for Habitat. And we are very pleased that in February, Abuja was already an important meeting. We are sure that Surabaya will be a very crucial meeting in order to have an African common position in respect to the big meeting of Quito. And in order to contribute to this event, we have decided to concentrate and mainly to bring three messages. The first is that Africa is urbanizing fast with, however, slow structural transformation. The second message is that cities can foster structural transformation. And the third is that there is a but. But there are conditions that make cities a real engine of development, and these conditions are crucial to transform urbanization into a real tool for development. Let me therefore start, I close instead of starting, with the first point. Africa is urbanizing fast, but with slow structural transformation. As you can see, Africa is urbanizing, and this is a mega trend that dates back. It's not a conjunctural phenomenon. This may help a growth that, as we have seen, is significant. Just to give you an idea, in Latin America this year, the rate of growth average is minus 0.3. Therefore, Africa is much better on this track. Southeast Asia is comparable, is above 5%. So this mega trend is strong in volume and in speed. Before 2040, the African continent will become in majority urban, but also in speed. To move from 50% of urbanization to 40% of urbanization, it takes for OECD country 110 years. Africa has done it in 60 years. Now, this big trend will bring automatically modernization and economic development? Well, not necessarily. Look at this graph, very interesting indeed. Africa has urbanized without industrialization. In fact, manufacturing has been, on a long term, in decline, as you can see from the green curve that is measuring at the same time level of manufacturing and urbanization. Yes, this was not necessarily always the case. You have other regions, in this case East Asia, that was capable at the same time to urbanize and use urbanization as a leverage for further manufacturing production. In Africa, this was the case between 65 and 75. Urbanization and manufacturing, let's say productive transformation, were hand in hand. But then the process was stopped. Now, we have to be clear, however, urbanization is not necessarily the concentration of people in large agglomeration. There are different types of urbanization, and if we look at it, we can see how urbanization can be a tool. In many rural or agricultural countries, urbanization is taking the shape of the strengthening of small and medium-sized cities whose role is extremely crucial. But if these are the facts, how cities, if in place as they are coming, can be a tool for structural transformation and economic development? Obviously, a crucial point is that rural and urban are not opposed. And in many cases, cities represent a leverage also for rural development and agricultural production. By the way, we all know that rural is not synonymous with agriculture, nor rural is synonymous with decline. And very often, in order to have growth and rural development, the link with urban is crucial. In fact, Africa urbanization could increase agricultural production and rural development by changing labor and food markets. First, urbanization creates upward demand for food production. The urban sector could currently pass from 40 to 50% of total food consumption. Secondly, density population, agglomeration, increase efficiency in post-farm segment, such as processing, logistic, distribution, retails, and food stalls. We all know that the agricultural production is just part of a chain that entails many other activities, and the value is very often provided by these other activities. Urbanization allows for the creation of this activity as it creates economic opportunities for that. And finally, there is imitation. In many cases, we have seen it in Ethiopia, rural households are 30% more likely to start a non-farm enterprise when they are close to cluster of micro-enterprises. In a certain sense, manufacturing and productive transformation is contagious, and cities provide a good field for this to happen. But there is a classical also argument that we economists will like to put in place, and is to say that there are agglomeration economies, and therefore if you put together people and firms, these automatically increase productivity. Well, in reality, you know, this is an old story. It has to deal with the idea that you pull together skilled labor, people living in the same city knows from each other. It has to deal with the fact that there are services that are created because of better division of labor, and therefore you not only have manufacturing, but you have also the services for administration, logistics, and many other things. And it has to do also with the fact that firms start to be more specialized because they are close to others that are equally specialized, and sometimes they may cooperate. However, let me say that this idea of the economist is a little bit simple. It's like an Aristotelical idea. The fire is burning because it has a burning force. But what is the explanation? Is it enough to put together people and firms to have significant advantages? Well, that's not necessarily the case. You can create a productivity increase if you have specific public goods that allow people to take advantage of this potential. If the labor market is lively, if people have transport to go to work, then cities can be an advantage. If firms, they find real services that are close, accessible, and available, then city can be a strong advantage. If firms find an atmosphere of trust and therefore they can cooperate to each other, then this can reduce transaction costs. But if these things are not in place, then cities can, as we have seen from the presentation of UNDP, create negative externalities. Let me give you just a number. For comparison, we have taken all the OECD metropolitan areas with more than 1.5 million inhabitants. And what do we see? We see that the GDP per capita growth up to 6 million of inhabitants. But when you move out of this threshold, then GDP per capita start declining, which means the productivity declines, which means that there are negative externalities. Now, cities are not islands in a sea of market relationships. Cities are in reality points connected with others. And city can be very strong if they can be supported by a network of other cities that are connected. This is the view of the networks of communication in Africa. What we need to concentrate is not on cities by themselves, but a network of cities, particularly when it comes to agricultural country, where small and medium-sized cities play an indispensable and crucial role. Not to mention, obviously, energy. And everybody knows that in order to produce efficiently energies, urban agglomeration matters a lot. I conclude with a last point, which is about what condition make cities sustainable and spur structural transformation. What can we do in order to guarantee that cities not only grow, but they have those public goods that make them a leverage for development instead of a cost and the negative externalities for development. Well, very simple idea, last slide. The principles are clear. There is a need for defining a clear policy agenda and support Habitat in its own process. And in order to do that, we need to have national strategies. The good news is that in Africa there are already 16 countries that have already started in various ways a national strategy for urban development, Morocco, Ethiopia, Nigeria, South Africa, just to mention some of those. These strategies need to be participatory. You cannot build public goods and investment appropriately if you do it in isolation. How many mistakes government have done in the past creating cathedral in the desert because it was done by a centralized decision unaware of the specific condition existing at local level. Many. These were failure, public failure. In order to avoid those, we need participatory policies and plan. We need a multi-sectoral approach. It's not by operating by sector and input-oriented that we will be effective, and we need to base the specific strategies on the specific local characteristics. The priorities are well known, but they vary from country to country. Three seems to be common to all now. First of all, clarifying land rights, infrastructure, and how to create intermediary cities and not only metropolitan areas. Finally, nothing can be done with a traditional structure of governance. We need connection and discussion among different levels. Decentralization is not a panacea if the central government doesn't talk with local authorities and the reverse. These are few ideas. You will find much more details in the report, but this was what I wanted to highlight on our special theme. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And ladies and gentlemen, in case you're wondering, that was Mario Pezzini, who is the director of OECD Development Center. Now, again, to reiterate, we have our panelists, Mamadou Biteye, who is the managing director of the Rockefeller Foundation, and we also have Aissa Chirabo Chire, who is sitting right there. She is the Deputy Executive Director of UN Habitat, and Abdoulaye Diané, who is the Executive Director of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. And I'm going to start with you, Madame Chachire. I'm very interested in the things that have just been said around sustainable, the fact that there is need to think a little bit harder about how urban centers are developing at the moment, and how then do you make the new settlements a little more sustainable. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that, and if you'd like to weigh in on that conversation.
Do I speak from here?
Yes, please.
Okay. Am I already on the mic?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Alan. Let me first of all thank the previous speakers for doing justice to the report. But more importantly, I think the report has been quite exhaustive, so I want to congratulate you for that report. Many thanks to Dr. Frani, too. Regarding the question that you put across, Alan, I want to highlight 3 points. And I feel that we at UN Habitat, who are headquartered here in Africa, in Nairobi, would like to further call upon the African leaders, because we believe that urbanization is a human-made phenomenon, and it's really up to leadership to make it work. You've explained it so well, but I want to identify 3 quick points. Today, the character of urbanization on this continent is much more to do with slums on one side and urban sprawl on the other. And this is not a problem of only poverty. It's poverty on the side of the slums, but it is lack of planning, and it is wastage of resources on the aspect of urban sprawl. And either way, we cannot get economic growth. So that calls for an organized, proactive, spatial planning that has to have strong leadership to guide that. Together with that, Alan, I want to highlight that for us to enable urbanization to add value to rural development and agricultural productivity, and vice versa, we need to look at it from a wider territorial planning process. And while today we're talking about urbanization, there's such limited capacity in terms of planning, especially beyond the capital cities. In many of the African countries, when you go beyond the capital cities, the intermediate towns and centers, as you mentioned, which are fastest growing, hardly have any planning capacity. So
And why
we need
is
to
that,
have
do you think?
national.
Why is that?
Pardon?
Why? Why is that the case?
Well, I would love to hear maybe from the member states, but I think there is insufficient focus in terms of allocation of budgets and capacity and the human capacity at that level.
And
It
then
is
there's also the
important that we
issue
talk about
The
we
issue of
have a budget for that.
decentralization. He talks about decentralization.
Absolutely.
And the connection between the central government and the local government. Is
Exactly.
this something that you find consistently in the course of your work?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. But again, the thing is, it has such great potential that urbanization planning and investment is really an investment process. In the sense that, what I want to say that if we plan well, and if we have good governance, especially on land, every urban land is a resource, which is never captured in the urbanization process. Because I think we are comfortable with urban sprawl. Those of us even who are seated here are having big compounds and everything because we're not paying for the same taxes that the Europeans are paying for in their urban areas. So we need to find out what are the key root issues that we have not tapped into, which really don't even call for finances as they do call for the right policy and the right implementation. So on that note, I would like to say, for instance, on the land issue, over 70% of land on this continent is not conventionally, officially recognized.
70%.
70%. And so when we're talking about urbanization and structure for transformation, it's on land. Can we redress the issue of land governance? And I want to congratulate Rwanda, much as it's home. I think it's done it. Over 95% of land has been registered. Let's begin from there and then get to the infrastructure development when our land governance, when our planning, when inclusive, equitable access to public services, to education facilities is available to everybody, Africans are capable of transforming, and they will do it. Thank you.
Mario, I wonder what you have to say to what she just said about land and the fact that that's the starting point.
For sure. This is also our idea, as in the report, we consider crucial the point also on capacities, how to create capacity at local level. And the plan is a crucial tool to do that. Also is the basis for contract with the central government. Because when you have a plan, you can sit and discuss together how the funds should be transferred. So decentralization is not only a matter of a percentage of resources that automatically goes to local authorities. It's also a matter of how central government and local authorities align on a series of priorities.
And Abdullah Jamneh, who is from the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, you have an interest in governance. Jamneh, thank you. You have an interest in governance issues. Yes. And I wonder if what your experience has been. You know, how does that tie into the discussion we're having at the moment?
First, let me say how happy I am to be here and to congratulate.
You might need to move closer to the mic.
Maybe I move it further. Yes, okay. Okay, I think it's fine. How happy I am to thank the ADB president for inviting me, and then congratulate the authors of this report. This is a report that historically I had been associated with, and I see it's getting better and better, I think, due to the caliber of the people we have there. We're looking at cities within the context of the transformation of our continent. As we look at this transformation, there are many mega trends that will affect this transformation, and we do not go into them. You know, issues of demographics, climate change, progress that we are making in technology, and others. So there are a series of these trends. But one of the most important, of course, is urbanization. And we recently had a whole seminar on it in Accra, just to highlight the importance of urbanization and of the challenge it poses to Africa. So I had wanted to say a few words about it, but he captured it so well that I felt that really it's something that I should move away from. But I wanted to tell you that it's very high on the agenda of the issues that the Mo Ibrahim Foundation was discussing. Now, we are looking at not only cities, but within the context of this transformation agenda, which is, there's a lot of optimism in Africa now. We have a common vision, Agenda 2063, and we feel that this is something we will do. And it is within that context that I am looking at this. And this is a catalytic factor for us to make progress in this is the whole issue of governance and leadership. You know, governance that we defined as the provision of political, social, and economic goods that governments are required to provide and that citizens expect from.
I just want to check and make sure that everybody can hear what you're saying.
Are you hearing me? Yes, maybe I should go.
Can you hear him?
You are hearing me?
Okay.
That governments are supposed to provide for their citizens, and their citizens should expect from them. And we are making a lot of progress in Africa with political governance and human rights issues and so on. But there's still some weaknesses, and the debate on urban things should be seen within that structure. And therefore, for the transformation agenda and to deal with urbanization, more move on governance is necessary. The next is really the whole issue of leadership. Leadership, you know, economic history has taught us that really without visionary leadership, you know, you make very little progress, you know, in achieving your goals. And if you want to see leadership, you know, what leadership plays, look at a few countries, you know, that are examples here.
Which countries are you talking about?
No, I can talk of Rwanda, I can talk of Cote d'Ivoire and so on, but don't take me on that path, because then I'll be seen to be beating the drum for one or two countries and so on. Right. Your own country also, you have a great leader there. So, but leadership is vital. So leadership is about taking risks, making choices and so on. And if you can do that, you look at your agenda, and that's the only way we can make progress, and that's the way we can handle this issue of urbanization.
Okay, if you have any question in the audience, please feel free to put your hand up. If you have any specific question directed at anybody here, put your hand up. And if you have the microphones, make sure they get to these people as quickly as possible. I'll be coming to you in a moment. But at this point, I'd like to bring in the Executive Director of Rockefeller, Mamadou Biteye. I wonder what your experience has been in as far as in your various interactions with governments, again, in the context of building sustainable cities for the future. What has that experience been like for your organization?
Thank you very much. And I would like also to add my congratulations to the authors of the report. And I think that what has been said about cities in terms of the potential that they have in driving development is very important. But from our point of view, we think that all of that is realizable in the context of really planning and developing city in a different way by adding a resilience lens, not planning cities just as it comes, because it has been highlighted with the rapidly growing rate of urbanization. This comes with a lot of challenges, and some of these challenges are stretched infrastructure. My sister talked about habitat and slums, and it comes also and has the potential also to come with social unrest, etc., due to several stresses, chronic stresses. And each of these might undermine, actually, the growth we are talking about. So to really look at cities to play their full potential, it's really important to look at how you build resilience. This is why, actually, the Rockefeller Foundation has initiated a global initiative called 100 Resilient Cities, which is aiming at selecting 100 cities globally to join in a network and think differently about the city. First of all,
Are
cities,
any of these cities in Africa?
yes, they are cities in Africa.
Are there any particular cities you could mention to us?
Kigali is one of them, Enugu, Dakar, Durban, and Arusha.
And what's the
members.
strategic objective in it all?
Yes, but the idea is really how cities that are selected not only are in a network, a global network of cities that are at a different stage in the journey to building resilience, to actually learn together and exchange. But cities selected also receive support, for instance, to hire a chief resilience officer. It is important because in the same way a city finds that it is important to have a mayor, it is important to have a chief of police, in the same way it is important to think that to have a chief resilience officer. Have a resilience, they receive also support to build an urban resilience plan, but also have access to a platform of resilience solutions, but also the support to leverage billions of dollars that are important for resilience infrastructure. This week, to date, 67 cities globally have been selected, and several African cities are in it. But this week on Wednesday, in Nairobi, will be announced the last 33 cities that will be selected in this network. And we look forward really to having many more African cities joining that.
All right, thank you very much for that submission. Right now, I recognize the presence of the Honorable Claver Gatete, who is the Minister of Finance of Rwanda. And if you don't mind, sir, I'd like you to chip in and talk to us about what's going on in Rwanda that is distinguishing it, because Rwanda keeps coming up all the time. Kigali has been mentioned now, and Rwanda has been mentioned again earlier on. What is Rwanda doing that is different and that the rest of the continent can learn from?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for organizing, for making this on the topic of this session. Really, Rwanda is not doing anything different. We are just learning from other countries that are doing it. But I just wanted to say three things. One is that we are now embarked, we realize that urbanization is really a big source of our development and has to be done properly. And we have embarked on a big project of choosing 6 cities outside Kigali so that we can develop them in a proper way that can help the rural sector to develop, that can help the urban sector to also develop. We've been working with the International Growth Center, the UN Habitat. We've been working with actually Professor Korea from Oxford University, trying to learn how do you connect a city, how do you make it more efficient, and how do you make sure that the city also links with the rural area. And that involves, of course, the public, both central and local, but also it involves the private sector, so that each one has something to contribute. And it boils down to what others were saying, is that when you're looking at a city, you're looking at the rich, you're looking at the very poor, you're looking at the slums. That means the inequality. We have a program for social protection that also links with microfinance institutions so that people can graduate. And also how do you organize the housing, whether it is settlement, I would say low-cost income housing, how do the businesses, how do you have a mixture in a way that a city functions? You cannot look at just a city without looking at the whole entire logistics, the whole transport, the infrastructure, and how it is organized. And we have also looked at the other issues of taxation, because we are looking at really the urban centers becoming a big contributor to the development, and also how you distribute the income. I wanted to, because we are getting bits and pieces here and there, but we wanted to know, because one of them is saying, on the economic side, this is fine. On the infrastructure side, this is how it works. And then others will talk about slums. Others will talk about different components. Are there good examples in the world on how this has worked and worked properly, so that we can maybe benchmark? And maybe finally we can come up with some indicators that will show us, if you did this, these are the implications. And then at the end of the day, how are they linked to the rural area? Just for the urban-rural migration, what are the basic examples that we can see? Okay. The theory is fine, but we want this time the proper practice.
Okay, I'll come to that in a moment, but before you sit down, Mr. Gatete, I'm still keen to also explore the issue of the connection between the central government and the local government. How do you make sure that those two are working and are working well? How does that happen in Rwanda?
Thank you very much. We've had decentralization now for almost 15 years. If for us it's worked properly, and I think our model, most people know it, that we have decentralized most of the work. But at the same time, we don't leave it for the local government. You have to, in our case, we also put in place the performance contracts. There are projects that are done at the local government level. There are projects at the central government level. And we have to have what you call performance contracts, where the local government must perform, and also the joint performance contracts, where the central government and the local government together have to be held accountable on specific activities. Let me give you an example. Now, there are certain things that are in the mandate of the Ministry of Agriculture, of the Ministry of Health, of the Ministry of Environment. There are certain activities that have to be done at the local government level. There are others that have to be joint worked. And we define clearly who is supposed to be doing what, and what are the joint activities, and how do we hold them accountable. I would say these performance contracts are signed together with the president. So you have no choice, you are evaluated, and you must perform.
So the president signs on behalf of the government and the local government mayor, presumably?
No, the president signs with the mayor, the president signs with the minister. I have a performance contract with the president, of which I must perform.
And you're reviewed, your performance is reviewed regularly?
On an annual basis, it's reviewed. For the local government, actually, it is even more serious. Let me just give you an example. When we introduced the performance contracts, the reporting used to be done by the local government to the central government, and they were all getting about 90% pass mark. But then we added another element, that someone else, an institute, has to do an analysis, and a joint team of the President's office, Prime Minister's office, would go and evaluate, take pictures, and show the population. The numbers came down to about 70%. But then we added another element of saying, actually, the ordinary people must have a say. So we do a survey on how satisfied they are in terms of the services. And this time the numbers, the marks came down to about 60%. And now you could see that this time, if there is an incident anywhere in a district, the mayor would be the first one to be there because you are being evaluated by everyone. So this way has forced mayors and the leaders and others to work because you are being evaluated.
Thank you very much for that submission, Mr. Gatete. And let's give him a round of applause for it. I'd like to come back to you, Mario. You seem very excited, and you seem to suggest that that's where...
Yeah. We have seen in several occasions the establishment of performance-based contract between level of government, and they work very well. They need certain conditions to be established. First of all, there needs to be a plan on which you base the contract. Secondly, you need a series of information to monitor and measure what is going on, and to make this information transparent to all the different areas of the city so that they know what is going on. And third, I agree totally with you, you need a table around which different cities can exchange their experiences. Because you ask for suggestions, there are plenty. I don't think there is the best city. Every city has its own specific characteristics. But what you can exchange is experiences on policy making. And these experiences are exciting in many developing countries.
Okay. You want to come back, if you can, very briefly, the Minister. And then any more questions, please? I'd like to open this up to the floor. Any more questions to the panelists or any submissions? Nobody else? Oh, okay, there's some at the back. I'll come to you in a minute. Yes, sir, very quickly if you can. The Minister, could you have a microphone here, please? I'm about to fire someone for non-performance.
Microphone has vanished.
Okay.
Yeah, there is a point that our colleague mentioned, which is very important. And one of them is that for us, the whole action of implementation is dependent on the plan. And once we have done the entire planning process, which is at the central, at the local government, starting from for each district, and at the central government level, once you have agreed on that plan, then you go into the budgeting process, and you go into the financing arrangements. Once you have agreed on it, that's when they set the performance contracts, which is in line with the plan that we develop. And we make sure that that plan, ordinary people really participate in that plan. And for activities, for example, that can be, sometimes you have a plan and you think that you can only implement it if you have resources that are in the budget. But in our case, we have a two-track system. Some of the implementation can be done with the normal budget, Others can be done by public volunteering, what we call every Saturday of every month, the last month, we have the community work. And then we divide what can be done by the community work. You don't have to spend a penny. And we like it from the Ministry of Finance because that's where we save a lot of money.
Oh, okay.
But for that one, for any implementation, it's in line with the plan that is agreed on, that has been passed by the cabinet. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I'd like you to think about that for a moment, Madam Kachira. I'll come to you in a bit. But let me take the questions at the back. The lady there, yes, you. Let's give her a microphone.
Hello. My name is Louise. I'm a journalist based in Cairo, Egypt. And obviously, I come from a very unsustainable mega city. So I'm very interested in this discussion. Actually, my question goes to the Director of UN Habitat. You were talking about how planning is extremely important to make a city more sustainable. But I was wondering, how do you also integrate local communities when they themselves try to change their own neighborhoods? I just want to give you a small example. In Cairo, there is a growing movement of urban agriculture. So people are growing food on their rooftops because they simply can't afford to tap in the normal food market. And so instead of like encouraging this, the government is basically trying to shut it down. So there clearly is no communication at all, because clearly this is not something that should be considered an issue.
Okay.
So this is my question. How do you link those two?
Make a note of that. We'll come back to you so that you can answer it. Can I take the next question from any other ladies at all? I'd like to hear as many voices from the ladies as you can. Any ladies at all with a question? Okay, you insist on, yeah, please, sir.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm not a lady, but I hope the question is also relevant.
Yeah, your hand remained up, so I didn't want to.
My name is Rolf van der Hoef, and I'm from the Institute of Social Studies in The Hague. And I'm here with a project which is called Include, which brings together African scholars, Dutch scholars, and African policymakers, including those of the African Development Bank on inclusive development. And my question goes very much to the beginning of the presentation, by the good presentation of Dr. Shimelis and also of the regional director of the UNDP. Both of them indicated the growing inequality. And my question is, how can the African Development Bank, in their normal policies of macroeconomic policies and of investment policies, take better attention towards the growing inequality on the African regions, which is everywhere documented? And the question is relevant because often one argues that we should redistribute after. We should first create economic wealth and then redistribute after. But the question is, redistributing wealth and income is very difficult. So how can we, in the design of the economic policies and in the design of the macro policies, better take care of inequality? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, any ladies at all? I have lights hitting me in the face here. Madam here at the front. Okay, we'll come to you in a moment, but let's take this question here first. There's a question at the very front here. Okay, let's get a microphone to her and let's ask that question at the back. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Primrose Nakaziwe from Bara University, Uganda. My question goes to the whole report writers. Many times we get these progress reports, but the concept of intersectionality is hardly applied. So it becomes very, very difficult to understand who is doing well and who is not doing well. We have a tendency of saying women, gender inequality, but which women? So interventions do not specifically target women or youth that are specifically in need or bear the gap in question. So I want to know if this concept of intersectionality is applied in this report to get to the specifics of who is who in each category or specifics of development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nakaziwe. Let me start with you, Madam, to answer your question, the question that was initially put to you. Could you,
Sure.
yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you very much. The question from the lady journalist from Cairo is very important because planning is about planning with the people. I think the first and the most important resource that we have in a city is human beings. And if you can engage them and make them feel that they have a voice, but they also have a responsibility. Minister of Finance Rwanda mentioned the issue of public accountability. I think it's really important that we realize, especially as leaders, that the first starting point is from there. So in UN Habitat, we advise that you can have the technical support that we give in terms of planning, but that has to be accompanied with a participatory approach, which we call the people's process, in which communities are engaged. You give them a plan on the macro issues, but you also need to hear from them on what their needs are. And then you plan out up to the extent of the budgetary process, whereby they can come up with their own contribution, sometimes in kind, other times actually in finances. And we do that with the communities, with private sector, with civil society, with all stakeholders. And we've realized that in places that do this, they even tap into the intellectual capital of their universities to be part of the evaluation process. So it's something that has worked and that is very effective. But to put it into the broader context that now we have, especially with the Sustainable Development Goals, now that we have got goal number 11 on sustainable cities and human settlements, we are working as the One UN to come out with details of the methodology of monitoring and evaluation that you can benefit from. And I want to give an example because we were asked what has worked and where. For instance, in Ethiopia, we've developed what we call the City Prosperity Initiative because we want to specify what do we mean by sustainable cities. What do we mean by prosperous cities? From a social, economic, political, they are indicators. We work through that with the government, and then we bring that to the city level so that at the end of the day, that can fit into the performance management systems that countries are talking about. And we believe that through that process, it would be possible now for countries to learn from one another, for cities to learn from one another. Because, Alan, as my colleague from UNDP said earlier, the bigger problem is actually not around only policy, but more importantly, the implementation of policy. So that's why we're saying, let's review and establish the right policies at national level, but importantly, let's look at the implementation of policies at the local government level. And that is why in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, we are talking about monitoring implementation at local government level.
Okay, that's very interesting. But she talks specifically about Cairo. She
Yes.
calls it as unsustainable as a mega city. She talks about the fact that people can't afford to buy food, so they'd like to grow their own food. And I think this is being copied across the continent. And then you have to, it obviously showcases a disconnect between what the government wants and what the individual wants. How do you create that connection to ensure that, that everybody benefits from it?
That is true, Alan. And maybe that's only not only unique to Cairo, but the bigger the city becomes, the more prone it is to conflict. Again, one of the speakers earlier talked about urbanization being a double-edged sword, in the sense that when we bring human beings together, the tendency is that they will either innovate and develop, but they also have areas of conflict. So specifically for that, I would advise that the leadership can discuss with people to look at options. If people want to do urban agriculture, why do they want to do it? And if government maybe feels that there could be better options, maybe in improving marketing. This has worked in places where you have seen this in some, especially I think in developed economies, where vegetables and foods, the food distribution chain in the city is made easier. For mega cities, if you insist on having markets in the supermarkets and designated places, they become more inaccessible because, again, of the congestion and the rest of it. But we have seen temporary sites whereby these local markets, in terms of vans, are placed somewhere so people can access what they want. So it's an issue of saying, okay, maybe that may not be the best option, but you have to address the need. So it's very important that leaders be open, listen, and come out with alternatives.
Thank you very much. I'd like the two gentlemen sitting here to address intersectionality in a moment. But I'd like to come to you, Mr. Janneh. You've been following this whole process of, you've been following the whole economic outlook for the continent for a while. and you have to wonder what needs to be done first based on the question that was asked. Is it going to have to be the creation of wealth and then redistribution, or how do you do it based on the question that he asked?
No, I don't want to be the planner for the continent. I think really we will leave this to the individual countries. The individual countries to decide what to do. But if you ask me if I pretended to be responsible for a given country, which I'm sure I will never be, I think you do both at the same time. You know, this sort of one is, say, we let some of us die a little bit before we reach a certain point and we start taking care of them. No, I think you do it from the very beginning. You incorporate that into any economic policy. But whilst I have the microphone, I just want to say a few things and to salute my friend Minister Gatete for what he said. In terms of really being able to hold the feet of authorities and monitor the goods and services that they are supposed to deliver. At this point in time, we do that more at the country level. We hold governments responsible, yes. But I think, and we have a model for that in the foundation, where we look at main categories, security and rule of law, we look at human development, socio-economic opportunities, etc. I think a model like that at the local level would be very interesting, where the goods and services where they expected to deliver, we are able to monitor and to measure it and to evaluate. I think you are making a great way in but this is a model we should look at and try to see to what extent we can make it Africa-wide. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Bite, do you want to add to anything at all that has been said by everybody?
Well, I would like to perhaps emphasize that the issue of inequality really calls for both participation and social safety nets. So I would agree that it's not the one or the other, but believe that the two. And because also there are experiences where social safety nets, the deployment, have been effective in also building the capacity to create wealth as well for poor people. So I would like just to insist on that.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. And now, intersectionality, starting with you, sir. There's that point that has been raised by my compatriot. Do you incorporate it when you're putting these reports together?
Incorporate what?
She talks about intersectionality.
No, I thought I was going to respond on the inequality.
You're welcome to do that, but she talks about Nakaziwe, she's sitting over there. Your question was about intersectionality. Various reports are being put together, but you want to be sure that that has been incorporated. Is that right? Into the writing of the report? Yes, that was her question. I'll put that, if you don't mind, answer that. But if you can answer the inequality one that you'd like to answer.
Yeah, my mind was just racing through as I listened to my colleague from ISS. This puzzle of growth not making much headway in terms of reducing poverty in Africa in the last, let's say, 15 years has questioned a lot of people, are we on the right track? Is this continent really going to make again poverty history by 2030? This signing of Sustainable Development Goals, are they going to be realized here in Africa compared to the MDGs, which we almost missed? So are we set for another round of 2030? We sit and then say Africa has missed its Sustainable Development Goals. So the evidence, at least that we know about inequality and growth relationships in Africa, suggests two things, at least from our perspective, from the bank's work. One is the core of inequality in Africa is regional or spatial. Close to 40% of whether wealth or income inequality originates from differences in where people live. It could be urban-rural, it could be within a country, for instance. I can give you a good example. Poverty in Accra is just less than 4%, in terms of the $1 a day. But in Ghana, the average poverty rate, all of us know, is not 4%. There are areas in the north, for instance, where poverty rates are up to 70, 80%. So how do governments take up the challenge of bridging this regional gap? One of it is actually infrastructure gap. That is where our also evidence points out. The regions or the countries are disconnected, fragmented, and therefore creating that conditions both on political economy side as well as the investment side becomes important. So from the African Development Bank's perspective, all of us know the bank has been investing hugely and paying attention on infrastructure issues. And now, for instance, the most important actually is the high fives. If I just elaborate on them, our analysis again shows, at least global, for developing countries, poverty responds not to growth. Actually, poverty responds quite vigorously to shifts in employment, especially from agriculture to industry. A 1% increase shift, for instance, of labor from agriculture to industry leads to a 0.8 reduction in poverty. This is huge. So Africa needs to vigorously follow what we call the structural transformation, which has, I think, recently a large literature, a large report that has been done, but the bank has taken a step in terms of generating and creating an industrial strategy for the bank, how to engage African countries, how to engage policymakers, how to engage the rest of the world in making sure that we are on the path to create jobs for the young. Again, when you look at the Feed Africa part of the African Development Bank's one of the high fives, agro-based industrialization. That means taking, again, industrialization to rural areas, agro-allied activities. They are going to create the seed, actually, for economic transformation, making subsistence farming into more of a business itself, a business activity. So farmers in rural areas are not only worried about several risks, but instead of creating an atmosphere for the next generation to have a small farm that is profitable and makes business sense to people who are engaged there, instead of running to the cities. Now, with the other one, improving the lives of Africans, the issue of safety nets has been raised, another way of tackling inequality in Africa. I can just cite again a very rigorous study we have done in the bank on the community-based health insurance in Rwanda. I don't know how many people here know that Rwanda, starting from 2000, for self-employed, for farmers, introduced what they called a community-based health insurance or mutual. Currently, the statistics that we have tell us 86% of Rwandans have some form of health insurance. This is the largest anywhere, even in developing countries. So we looked at the impact of this on a series of outcomes, including poverty. This safety net has led close to 12 percentage point reduction in Rwanda's poverty because it led to a reduction in catastrophic health-related expenditure. As you know, poor farmers and everyone in the self-employment sector, the main important risk they have is about their health and the related and associated expense when they want to deal with it, when the seriousness, illness becomes serious. And the health insurance scheme in Rwanda, for those people in that program, helped them reduce this catastrophic expenditure so much that their level of poverty also has declined. So a combination of all these policies which the bank advocates hopefully leads to lower inequality in the future.
All right, thank you very much for that. Now we talk about the issues raised over there, and I'd like to throw this to you. The question about intersectionality, Ayodele, what do you have to say about that?
Thank you very much. One of the key issues addressed by the report is looking at that particular dimension. And based on what we have found, at a global level, we observe that 2/3 of the youth that are currently working are in the poverty category, while in Africa, 9 out of 10 youth working in Africa are considered to be poor. That shows the intensity and the impact of poverty and inequality within that particular category. And if you could remember clearly well when I was making the short presentation on the human development dimension, and I said one of the major impediments that have really reduced the impact of growth in reducing poverty is the high level of inequality, and particularly high level of gender inequality in the society. It shows the element of sectionality we've looked into it. And essentially based on the question from colleagues from Hay, one thing we have noticed is that the macro dimension is very important for you to really address the issue of inequality in Africa. From UNDP side, we look at it from 3 dimensions. 1, the issue of participation, 2, issues of redistribution, and 3, issues of governance. From the participation side, what we know is that the best way to address inequality is to look at those sectors of the economy where the poor people and the disadvantaged people are much more engaged. And then you shift policy to enhance the productivity of such sectors. We discovered that about 60% of poverty in Africa comes from the agricultural sector, and as well as the informal sector. The best thing in the macroeconomic policy is for you to devise a kind of strategy that enhances the productivity of this particular sector. Indirectly, you have achieved the issue of inequality and poverty reduction. And again, when it comes to the issue of taxation, we discover that in most countries, the rich are not really paying the appropriate tax they're supposed to pay. And for you to devise a kind of pro-poor tax policy shows that you generate enough resources that you can use to really leverage the issue of inequality. And finally, one thing I know which resonates very well is President Thabo Mbeki's report on illicit financial flows. And we have seen how serious the issue is. What is going out in terms of illicit financial flow is far more than what is coming into Africa as ODA. And what we know is that 2, 3, 4 individuals are just taking millions of dollars away, whereas that can be used to enhance the living conditions of million Africans living in our urban centers. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I have about 5 minutes to wind this session up, and thank you very much for your involvement and patience. Very briefly, if you can.
Yes, I would like to address, if you allow me, an issue that was raised by my friend, Gianni, and it was, what is the connection between urbanization and the general transformation in Africa? Well, we started 15 years ago together with the African Development Bank this report, and now more recently UNDP joined the crowd. And there is a line in what we have done in the last years. We started some years ago putting the accent on demography and the enormous amount of young people that will join society in the next year in Africa. This is unprecedented, we said 4 years ago. Therefore, what to do? The year after, we said maybe we can find some additional jobs in mineral and non-renewable resources. But we know that despite there are spaces, because in Africa the investment in exploration are only $5 per square kilometers, whilst in Australia 60, you will not create enough jobs to absorb all of this young population. Then we said maybe global value chain, because you can specialize in one part of the process of production. That's true, but if in '93 Africa was producing 1.4% of the global production of intermediary goods, today we are still at 2.2. So you can improve, but this will not be the only answer. Industrial policy here are crucial. Then we said, if it's not only the external economy that can provide hints, where can you find new sources of growth and development? And we said, for sure in rural areas last year. And here we are saying, in urban areas, these are crucial components of the leverage for growth. That's why we have dedicated so much attention. And when it comes to rural or urban policy, they cannot be sectoral. They cannot be segmented. They need to look at problems that are in places and address them in a multidimensional way. Unfortunately, the economic approach in the last 30 years has been going exactly in the opposite direction. Work sectorally, and then we will measure you. That's not the best way to do it.
Thank you very much. During the would you like to address my question on education? Because I'd like to talk about the quality of education, because that's an issue that was raised at all at some point. I wonder if anybody on the panel, in the audience, would like to say anything at all in that respect. Yeah, everybody here wants to say something. So let me start with you, Madam, very briefly, and then I'll come to you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan. Mine would be really to ensure that we cover the gap between the education, the skills that come out, that people acquire in the education process, and the available jobs on the market.
You know, that's something that I've had my president of 30 years, President Museveni, say for a very long time. He says that, but it has never really happened. Some people will argue that the quality of education, probably across the continent, is becoming increasingly relevant. So what needs to be done? Yeah. Yes, to you, Madam. I'm still...
I'll just give an example of what
Yes.
I've seen
Okay.
work, I think, in two areas here on the continent, which maybe is very practical. I think I'll give an example of Ethiopia in the housing industry, because they have used the challenge or the focus on affordable housing as a job creation factor. And they have trained their local communities to be part and parcel of actually the construction, the beneficiaries in terms of construction. Why am I raising this? Because the report is saying that 2/3 of the infrastructure development that is to take place between now and 2050 is not yet. It's available as a potential opportunity, but it will pass like any other if we don't train our own people and try even to put in place policies to help them access the job market that urbanization brings. We need to look at urbanization as a tool that we can use to empower our people, and not just a process of one part of people moving from rural to urban areas or designating areas as urban and rural. That is very, very important. And in the same way, the education system should be geared towards filling in the gap of what is required in the urbanization process to make it as effective as possible. I think that is one key area.
That's a very interesting point. Anybody else, would you like to build on that, sir?
2 minutes or 2 seconds.
Yes.
No, I think it's good that you put this whole education debate on the table. We talk of the demographic dividend in Africa. The only way we're going to turn that into a force for Africa's transformation is to give appropriate education, quality education to the youth. And we match that with our challenges and priorities. For example, if you look at universities in Africa, we make a lot of noise about agriculture. There's a sector that we feel would drive the transformation agenda, industrialized based, on agriculture. 2% of university intakes in Africa are in agriculture. It's scandalous. 2%. Can you figure it out how many universities were in Africa, what they're doing, and so on? It's 2% that read agriculture. So we have to, what do? We have to be draconian, we have to push people into the sector. But I'm sure.
But if you become draconian, the Mo Ibrahim report will come out and they'll say,
No, but I am sure that the debate should take place. The debate should take place with the young, because they are interested in having education, but they are interested in education which will also lead to opportunities for them. Okay. And if this debate takes place, I think orienting them into these relevant sectors should be fine.
I'd like to end this discussion there because of time pressures. I do thank you very much for being such an engaged and engaging panel. Let's give them a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. And to you, to the audience, thank you very much for your participation, for your questions, and very importantly, for your presence as well. The report is available online if you'd like to download it. It's free of charge, and it's the AfricanEconomicOutlook.org.